All right, so welcome to the Word of Our Testimony podcast. My name is Mitchell, and I've got Blake here, who is Blake Wood, who is pastor of Faith Community Church in Harrisonburg, and just really excited to hear his story. Before I get into his bio, just want to share a little bit about this podcast. If you're stumbling upon it for the first time, you can look in our description to see where the name comes from. It's Revelation 12, 10 through 11. And really what we do is just have people on, hear their stories of how they heard the gospel, how they learned who Jesus was, and how they came to follow him and how he's just changed their life. And so if this is all new to you and you never heard of the gospel, I just ask you to listen and just check it out, see what you think. But yeah, if anyone listening to this, see if God puts somebody on your heart to send the link to. We want to share this with a lot of people and people, believers and non-believers, just to be obedient to the Great Commission and just get the gospel out. So yeah, thank you for being here and hope that you enjoy listening. So Blake Wood is, like I said, the senior pastor of Faith Community Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He's a husband, father, grandfather, and he's been a follower of Christ for 50 years and in full-time ministry for 40 years. And he has been a church planter and a missionary in the Middle East. He also has a master's and doctorate degree in ministry, and he's passionate about being a house of prayer for all nations and helping others step into this calling. So thanks for giving me the privilege of...
Yeah, it's my privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So, yeah, I like to start off open-ended with people and, just let you start wherever, but just want to hear your testimony, hear how you heard the gospel, and sort of the beginnings of it all.
Well, I love to tell this story. So I'm 61, and I did not grow up in a Christian home. My parents divorced when I was about 5, and I lived with my mom, but I saw my dad on the weekends. But there was a couple, Gene and Sherry Thompson, who used to come every Sunday and pick me up and take me to church. I think my mom and her new husband, who kind of became like my stepdad, I think they just wanted to sleep in on Sundays, and Gene and Sherry said, "Can we take Blake to church?" And they're like, "Yeah, get him out of our hair," And so, when I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, I would go to church because this couple would come and pick me up, and they're still living. They're still at the same church or still in that same area, connected to that same church. I actually saw them, not too long ago. So we're talking like, this has been 50 plus years ago. But I just let them know how they impacted me. So they would take me to this church, and then the people in this church is a little kind of country church, and people in this church just kind of loved on me and just shared Jesus with me through their appreciation of me. Never made me feel like I was an outsider, even though my parents didn't come to church. They just welcomed me into that family. So I got exposed to the gospel by being in that church. I heard it preached, and then I heard it in Sunday school, the songs that we sang, and I remember, understanding it, but I didn't make a decision to like really give my life to Jesus until I went to a summer camp, and I remember that it was 1975, August of 1975, and I remember when I went there that I wasn't supposed to go there because I wasn't old enough yet, and but my brother was a counselor, so they let me go, and you're supposed to be 13, and I wasn't yet 13, and so I look back on that and go, my whole world changed. My eternity changed, and in a sense, I wasn't supposed to be there, right? And so then that's another part of my story is is my older brother, who's significantly older than me, more than 10 years older than me. I mean, he was away at college a lot of time, but I always looked up to him, and he would kind of pour into me, especially once I said yes to Jesus by giving me like books. I was very athletic, and so he'd give me books about Christian athletes and to encourage me. But I say that even though he didn't like pray with me to become a follower of Jesus, his lifestyle led me to Jesus, right? Because I was watching that. So on the one hand, there's these people that didn't really know me, but somehow knew about me and took me to church every Sunday. And then when I got to this summer camp, that's when I really the invitation was so clear that I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And that was a large part of that was seeing my brother's life, because he was the first believer in our family.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you said like 6 when you went to the Sunday school with these people?
I don't remember. I mean, so I remember when we moved, when my parents divorced, and I remember moving, and I remember it was at that new house. So I could have been 6, 7, maybe even 8, but but I remember that they faithfully took me for years. So I'd probably say it was like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. They took me, pretty much every. I can't remember a time that they ever canceled on me. There may have been a time that my mom called and said we're going somewhere or whatever, but they were just very faithful.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they probably had no. They were just being obedient and faithful. They had no idea what would come of your life. That you would be a missionary and a pastor and all this.
Right, and so I love to tell their story because I think, I helped start some churches in Iraq, in Baghdad, in the north of Iraq, and I think, those people in Iraq who came to know Jesus are like the spiritual grandchildren of these people, and they don't even know it. They had no idea when they're just taking this 6, 7-year-old boy, had no idea, but they poured into me, and it changed my life. But then it also has changed nations. So
wow,
yeah,
and it just reminds me of I don't know where it is, but Paul's talking about planting seeds and God providing the growth. I feel like that's a lot of what ministering is, or it's just doing these little things like that. But God can do. He's able to do amazing things with that. So
actually, I'm going to be sharing, I think, this Sunday from this passage where Paul says that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. So always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. And sometimes we think that things we do, like what those people did, that was a labor for the Lord, right? They were. It was inconvenient for them. I'm sure there were times they're like, "Why are we doing this again?" And they probably had no idea until, who knows, decades later, when I was able to kind of tell them the impact they had on me. So
that probably helps you encourage people in like the child care here, and because it can really make a big impact.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: what are some things you saw in your older brother? Maybe some qualities or things that he was doing that showed you Christ, or maybe like speak to that a little bit.
So, one, I would just say the fact that he's my older brother, right? I mean, so just in your family, or whatever if you're a parent, if you're an older sibling. I mean, you just naturally have certain influence that you don't deserve. You just have it, right? And it just kind of comes with the territory. So I'm sure part of it was just that. I mean, he was who I wanted to be. He was athletic, and he was my older brother. But in addition to that, he showed just genuine concern. I remember going through some counseling, maybe 18 years ago, and I remember sharing with the counselor, and I thought I was talking about issue A over here, and somehow it got back to the fact that I had some, kind of trauma in my childhood from a divorce, and my stepfather was alcoholic, and so. And I realized that when I got out of that counseling session, I called my brother, this one. I have two brothers. I called this older brother, and I just said, "Hey, I just wanted to," and my intention was just to say, "I just realized this counseling session, how important you were to me, because you were like, not that you were trying to be a father figure, but you were like someone who I just felt I could be. I was loved and accepted, and I started to tell him, and all of a sudden, I just lost it. I just began weeping. And my brother's, I'm out in Seattle, he's in Baltimore, and he's thinking, what's happening? Are you okay? What's going on? And I'm just like, I'm just so grateful. It's just hitting me how much you impacted me just by showing me affirmation, acceptance, listening, caring, those kind of things, just simple things of just saying you're valuable, and that showed me Jesus. Sometimes there's an expression, the story told about this little girl who gets scared when the thunder happens. She runs in and jumps in bed with her parents, and they say, "Well, don't you know that Jesus is with you?" And she's like, "Yeah, but I need Jesus with skin on." And so sometimes we need Jesus with skin on, and it just makes it that more tangible to us. So.
Man, that's awesome. He sends people. Every time I talk to somebody, they always talk about these people God orchestrated in their life and just how much they influenced them. But It is really important to do what you did and share, because people may never know,
right,
unless you tell them.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so this is like middle school age. You get saved. What was the next couple years like? Was it like instantly, I want to be a pastor, missionary, or how did you get to that point?
Yeah, so that's a great journey. So I actually like to tell a story that I think best illustrates it. There's these things called Aesop fable, where there's this rabbit. He's always getting into trouble. He's a rabbit from the briar patch, so he's called Brer Rabbit. And so this is how I describe the next 9-10 years of my Christian life. So Brer Rabbit got an invitation to two different animals' house for dinner. One was, say, the turtle, and one was like a possum. And so he's invited the same day to the same house for dinner, and he gets to the fork in the road, and he says, "Well, I think the turtle will have a good dinner, so I'll go to his house." So he hops down the trail, and he kind of can smell it, and that smells good. He said, maybe the possum, what he has is better. And so he hops over there and he smells that, and he's like, "Well, let me go look and see." And so he goes back and forth until finally he misses dinner at both houses because he can't decide. And really, for a number of years, that was my Christian life. Is I didn't want to be Christian enough that I got all the benefits there, because I wanted all the experience of living in the world. I was an athletic guy. I was pretty popular in school, and so I had opportunities to do things that kind of the world was doing, but I was never happy at it because I knew it was fundamentally wrong. And so I kind of felt like I was going back and forth. And I actually this is another person. So I've told you about this couple, Gene and Sherry. I told you about my brother. There's this other woman. Her name was Eva, and she was a youth leader. And this is really kind of shocked me into my senses, and I was now like senior in high school kind of thing, and she says to me, she says, "Blake, when are you going to get serious about Jesus and stop osmosing through life?" And I'm like, I didn't know what osmosis meant, and I was like, it didn't sound good. So I went and looked it up. It's kind of like going back and forth between some kind of filter, going this side. And so I understood what she was saying, and I didn't like what she said to me, but man, it woke me up. And I was about 18 or so, and so I think I know I was saved, and there was times that I was hot for Jesus, but there was times I was cold, hot and cold. But when I was 18, 19, and she said those things to me, is I had to do some real soul searching, and I realized I'm either going to be all in or I'm not, and I decided I was going to be all in, whatever that looked like. And I didn't think I was going to be a pastor. That wasn't my idea. I wanted to be I wanted to have my own landscape business. Is kind of the what I thought I was going to do. There's one other part of that, because that's once something else happened in my life. So actually, in my senior year, I had a full scholarship to Penn State on ROTC, but Navy ROTC, because I wanted to be a career military officer. I wanted to be a Marine, and so I had earned this scholarship. And 2 weeks before I was to go, I found out from a medical report that I had a skin disorder that they took away my scholarship. And so that really rocked my world, right? And so I just was like going, everything I'd been leaning towards. So, because I had this sense of I wanted to do something noble with my life. I wanted to do something that made a difference. And so I was planning to do that. So then after that, after I'm kind of like, okay, what do I do with my life? My scholarship's gone. I can't go into the military. And they actually made the right decision, because when I turned 30 years old, this skin problem I had actually became a form of arthritis called psoriatic arthritis. You probably had exposure to it. Yeah. And I couldn't get out of bed. And so the military knew what they were doing. They didn't want to have something, potential liability like that. So then I began to think, okay, what am I going to do? I went to college. I was going to be a landscape architect and stuff like that. And then I was just not finding any satisfaction, right? I had this noble thing. I wanted to be a Marine Corps officer. And then I'm trying to think, okay, what can I do in the business world? And I was just never feeling satisfied with that. And I remember going to talk to a pastor during that time. I was going to a secular university, and I told him, I said, I think maybe I have a call to ministry. And he said to me, and I didn't know him, I just knew he was a pastor, and I just wanted counsel. He was actually a campus pastor, and he said, well, I recommend you go into ministry if there's nothing else you can do. And I was like, what do you mean? And I didn't understand at first, but this is what he meant, is like, only do it if you can't be satisfied with anything else. Not like if you can't succeed at anything else. If God won't let you not do anything else. And that's what became, my experience was, God wouldn't let me be content with anything else. So
that's really good advice, actually.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I felt like I was hearing a little bit of my own story earlier when you were talking about being back and forth.
Yeah.
That was my similar experience, and I had a moment where I used the same words in my episode, but I wanted to be all in.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the only way you'll truly experience that abundant life that Jesus talks about. If you're a lukewarm Christian, it's just not going to do it. The world won't please you, and the Christian life won't please you because you're not doing it the right way.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I go, man, you just make yourself miserable. It's like, so I concur 100% with that. And I did find that was true when I went all in. All of a sudden it began to make sense, and it began to bring joy. And I didn't even at that point, it wasn't like I'm going to go all in and go into ministry. I'm going to go all in just for Jesus. And so I started taking my opportunities to do ministry more seriously. And then I found out, people are saying that I'm effective with them. And so it just kind of led into that. But it was whether I was going to be a landscape architect or landscape business owner, and just be all in for Jesus. I was just like, I'm going to be all in for Jesus. And then it became more clear later. It's like, okay, I'm fruitful. It's making a difference for people. I want to do this every chance I get. So
I just thought of something. Just thinking like someone might be listening and think like being all in for Christianity means you have to be a pastor or a missionary, but that's not necessarily true. Like you said, you can be all in for Jesus, and like he needs people in all the world in different fields.
Right.
So like you can be all in for Jesus and do anything.
Yeah,
it doesn't.
Well, I'd say the vast majority of people that are all in for Jesus are not in ministry per se, right? I mean,
yeah.
Absolutely, and in so much of like the early church, even people like Paul were tent makers, right? They literally were tent makers. They had to have a job for what they did, and they weren't able to be compensated fully. So I mean, some of the first people were first leaders in the church were people that were certainly bivocational, and people that are really, frankly, my heroes are the people who are even in my life today are working in the medical field, or working in with HVAC or plumbers or whatever. But I see that they bring Jesus into that environment, and then they give beyond that. They're like, okay, I'm not gonna work 80 hours a week. I'm gonna work and provide for my family, but then I'm gonna give God some of the very best of my time and energy, and I'm gonna lead this men's group, or I'm gonna do that. So to be honest with you, most of those are my heroes in the faith.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear. So you feel this call to ministry. What did that look like in the early years as you were figuring that out?
Yeah. So there's another guy who was a big influence on me. His name is Bill Watkins, and Bill is still living, and I'm still in touch with Bill. And Bill was here's a classic example. Bill is vice president of a bank, and Bill was actually the one who was at that camp that my brother got me into, that I wasn't old enough to go to, but because my brother was a counselor, Bill was the one when I heard the gospel presented, and I went up and said, I need to accept Jesus into my heart, whatever that looks like. Bill's the one who actually helped me do that. So Bill kept his eye on me even during those years where I was going back and forth. And when I got ready to get serious, Bill said, I'll like spiritually mentor you. So he's vice president of bank, and he's mentoring me. And then there's this little church not far from us who has 20 people in it, and they can't afford a pastor. And so Bill recognizes I have some ministry potential, mm-hmm. and Bill himself has ministry potential. He can preach, he can do things, but his job is as vice president of bank. But he says to me, why don't we offer to co-pastor that church? It's only 20 people. And so I'm like, yeah, sounds good to me. So actually, I get to live in the parsonage, and I'm in college, and I get to live in the parsonage, and so we start pastoring this little church together. Well, Bill is basically like Barnabas. Barnabas is this character, in the book of Acts with the guy who becomes known as the Apostle Paul. So Barnabas, and his name means son of encouragement, is like he like opens the way for Paul. And that's kind of like what Bill does for me. Is he says, hey, why don't we pastor that church? They never would have let me do that, but they knew Bill because Bill was well respected, etc., and so they let him. But he was basically just, he was like the credibility behind it, but he was giving me a platform to learn how to preach, learn how to do things, and that little church in a year kind of grew substantially so that they could then afford a pastor. And then I went away after I finished college. I went away to go to graduate school because now it was becoming clear to me that I had gifts for ministry and I had passion for ministry. But Bill is another one. So, Gene and Sherry, who took me to church and just, made it possible. My brother, who modeled it for me. Bill, who was there when I said yes to Jesus, but then just kind of stuck with me, even though I wasn't on fire for Jesus for years. Then when the moment came, he like mentored me into ministry, and so that's how it started. Was I was in college, I didn't have any real ministry experience, but other than Bill had been mentoring me for a year or so, and he's like, yeah, let's offer to pastor this church. And like I said, then we helped to get healthy enough that they could afford a pastor. So it was a good experience. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I'm blessed. I'm blessed by these people that poured into my life. So
he vouched for you.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So you go to grad school. What is that, just real quick, what is that like? Like, going into seminary, is that kind of what it was?
Yeah. So I went down to Asbury Theological Seminary just outside of Lexington, Kentucky, and something kind of similar happened there. As I started into seminary, it's going to be a 3-year degree, and one of the professors takes a liking to me and says, hey, he found out what I had done back up in Maryland where I was, and he's like, we got a little church like that needs a pastor. How about if you and I pastor that church? And so this seminary professor does that. Well, when the moment comes and the bishop is ready to say, okay, you two are going to pastor that church, he's like, no, let's just have Blake do it. And I'm like, what? And so that guy was there, but again, it was his credibility. His name was Dr. Manoia, and he's going to be with Jesus now. But again, there was someone who vouched for me and said, we can take that on. Again, it was a little church, probably about 20 people, and then I pastored it while I was in seminary, which I always think is the best thing that could have happened to me, because you go to a graduate school, and typically it's a 3-year degree, and you're learning, but you're not getting to put it into practice. But here, I got to put it into practice all the time. And I was married by that point. I was able to help provide for my family, my wife. We didn't have kids at that point. But I had forgotten about how important a Dr. Manoia was. So I went there, did a 3-year degree called a Master's in Divinity, and I pastored a church while I was there. And then I came back to my home area, and Bill, helped me plant a church. Wow. And so I planted a church, and Bill was like now my assistant. So in the beginning, like I was his mentor. I mean, he was my mentor, and he was opening the door for me to do this. But then I came back after seminary and planted a church, and Bill was like my assistant in that. And then there was a woman who was at seminary who came and joined the team. So her name was Arlene, and Bill and me, and I just thought it was an amazing team, because Bill was this strategic thinker kind of guy. He would always have like a planner planning out X, Y, Z, and Arlene was like this very caring, shepherding kind of person, and I was more like this, just go, let's just, more evangelistic. Let's just go tell people about Jesus. And so we just made this great balance. She was kind of like caring for people. Bill was making sure we kind of did things in a strategic way, and I was, kind of the more of the energy towards reaching new people. So I did that for about seven years. Wow. And again, it probably never would have happened if it hadn't been for a guy like Bill, who was then ready to put his reputation on the line, because we actually started the church in the headquarters of the bank where he was a vice president. So they had a community room, and so that was actually where we started our church, in the community room of the bank. So
wow, that's so cool. Yeah. As you were talking, I'm wondering, what is it like in terms of your relationship with God? What are the pros and the cons of like diving deep into seminary and like your work is for God? I can imagine that can be so fruitful for your relationship with God at times, but maybe at times it can be challenging because work is hard and school is hard, and maybe you can take that where you want.
So I never thought of seminary nor of any of my ministry positions. I never thought of them as work or as a job, right? I mean, it was like I'm getting paid to do what I feel like I need to do. And so I never was like, what's the salary there? What's the benefits there, etc. It's like if I felt like God was saying, go do that, then I was like, all right, let's go do it. And my wife has been always very, amazingly supportive in that kind of stuff. So I'm sure maybe for different personalities, maybe it can be more of a challenge, but I just have to say I've been very fortunate that in these 40 years that I've been all in for Jesus, I've never been like, why did I choose this career? It just never appeared. That thought has never come to my mind. I've never thought and I know people who get burned out and leave the ministry. I mean, listen, there's times that I feel like I know what burnout is, but I just want to then get refreshed and get back in it. I mean, I'm 61 and I'm still thinking like, what do I want to do for Jesus when I grow up? I'm still, I still am dreaming, right, about that. And I believe that God's going to give me, if Jesus tarries, doesn't come back before then, I'm hoping he gives me another 20 years of vibrancy. My dad's 93 and he's still kicking. So I'm hoping that, and believe that God's got more in store for me. So.
Wow, that speaks to something I was going to ask you is after 40 years, how do you keep it going? But it sounds like you just feel this calling and it kind of fuels you.
Yeah. And at this point in my life and in my ministry, I mean, I'm very, very blessed to be a part of this church family. And it's a joy to do what I get to do, to be the people want to come and sit and get spiritual counsel, husbands and wives or couples that are going to be, maybe considering marriage. People want to have me open the Word to them. I mean, I just realized what an honor it is, right? I mean, I don't think I take it for granted. I hope I don't, and I don't think I do. That maybe there was a season I took it for granted, but yeah. So I don't have to like work myself up for it. It's the real deal. It's who I am, and if the economy went south and pastors, there wasn't enough money for pastors to be paid, I would be doing this while I was breaking up rocks for a job. I would be doing this on the side. It's not like, hey, this is my job. This is my calling and I get paid to do my calling. But I would be doing this if I was doing something else. I would be doing this on every free moment I had. So
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's a really I can attest to just being in your church. I can just tell that you take it really seriously and like you have such a joy about you when it doesn't seem like you're just dragging yourself to come do all this. Like you have such a like a drive to do it. It seems like, and I've always appreciated your humility in it. Like you're very, the the way you preach and the way you interact with the church, it's very humble, and like you're just a normal guy who's like a serving God, you know. And I've always appreciated that, and also just how you stick to the Bible so closely when you preach. I really like that a lot.
Let me just say, I think I've had that affirmation, you know, at other times, and I thought, so why is that? And I think it's because I started pretty young. You know, I was still in college, and I didn't have like any of my own wisdom, and so it was right. It was like a really good habit that I developed. Is like, if I have anything to say to this, you know, 60-year-old person, and I'm 20, and it's only going to be by God's authority. And so I think I've just always learned to stick to that. So I just mentioned that to say, I learned to teach and communicate early on when I had nothing of my own value to share. And so I just say it's all in God's word, and I've just learned that that's true even to this day, right? So yeah.
He's the one with all the wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're okay sharing I want to hear a little bit about your time in the Middle East.
Okay. Yeah. So the one I was hoping we'd get to that, because the one thing that I had said earlier that I just love kind of comes full circle. So, you know, my desire when I was 17, 18 was to be, Marine Corps career officer. That's what I wanted to do. So when I found out the summer between my senior year and first year of college, when I found out that my scholarship was not there, you know, I was no longer available. I don't know. I was like, God, what in the world? You know, I mean, how could you do this to me? I mean, I wasn't really on fire for Jesus then. I mean, I was a believer, but I wasn't really on fire. But I still was like, God, you know, well, how could you do this to me, etc. But then I was, maybe I was 40 years old when the war in Iraq broke out. I'd have to do the math. Maybe I was a little more than that, but no, I would have been about 40. And I remember I had been in Jordan, and I taught at a seminary in Jordan, and I was learning Arabic in Jordan. And some of my students at the seminary there were from Iraq, and I really took to them. And one of the things I taught was church planting, because I had planted a church, and I had a doctorate in things related to, like, my doctorate is in global evangelization. And so anyway, I was pouring into some of these Iraqi students, and not only in class, but then I was kind of mentoring them on the side. And when Saddam fell, so it was in March of 2003. Now, Saddam was still alive. We hadn't captured him yet. U.S. hadn't captured him yet, but he had fallen, and the U.S. was in control of Iraq for the most part. So the guys tell me, the Iraqi guys are like, let's go back and plant a church. I'm like, there's a war going on. But anyway, so I said, well, you guys go and I'll come later. And so they go back and they start a church in Baghdad. And so I come over in the summer of 2003. And one of the things I remember is we rented a villa that's just a big house. And we started a gathering Christians there, or believers in Jesus. Some were from a Christian background, some were from a Muslim background, what were beginning to follow Jesus. And we were having a service, and all of a sudden, U.S. military pull up in like a Humvee up to this villa. And so there's, I don't know, there's like, say, 6 of them or whatever, and a handful. And 1 or 2 of them stay outside. I think 3 of them come inside, and they interact with me. Couple things that were really, first of all, they were like, we noticed a lot of people coming in and out of this villa. And well, actually, it's a church, and they're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Because, they're paying attention to that kind of stuff. Why are all these people coming in and out? So couple of things that happened. One was they're like, okay, and they've got their machine guns and all their gear on, and so they're kind of looking around. Okay, all right, so it's a church. I said, yeah. I said, hey, could we pray for you? And so these Iraqi Christian men gather around these Marines and lay hands on them and pray for them. And I'm telling you what, it was the most powerful thing, because these guys, these Marines, they see Iraqis and they're thinking, I'm trying to save my life, and all of a sudden these guys are praying for them. So that was just a huge moment. I just could see the impact on those Marines about that happening. The second thing that's related to that was, I just thought back to when I was 18, and I thought, I might have been here as a Marine Corps officer, or I could be here representing Jesus. Now, no shame in being there as a Marine Corps officer, but if I had to have my druthers, my choice, I would have rather been there, being there representing Jesus, right? And so I just thought, I would have probably been here. If I would have been in the Marine Corps, I would have still probably hadn't had my 20 years in yet. I very well could be here, but with one kind of agenda versus this other agenda. And I just thought about the wisdom of God, how that door that broke my heart when I was 18 closed. It broke my heart. God, how could you do this? And it actually allowed me to do something that in eternity I think is even more significant, serving our country, helping people find freedom in their nation. That's important stuff, but eternal freedom, eternal peace. And so I just thought about how significant that moment was for me when that light bulb went off.
Wow. His ways are higher.
Oh my goodness.
And
yeah,
he sees our desires, and he cares about them, but
yeah.
He also is like, it might be better this way.
Right. Right. And I'm hard-headed enough that I wasn't reading that at 18. I wasn't obedient enough at 18 to be even listening for it. But he shut that door, and it was really by it was grace. It was goodness that he shut that door.
Wow.
So
that's powerful.
Yeah.
So how long were you over there?
So I was in the Middle East for 10 years. But I never lived in Iraq. I lived in Jordan, and I would go back and forth, and then I also lived in Cairo. So in Jordan, I started to learn Arabic there, and was an adjunct professor at a seminary that was in Jordan. There are not many seminaries in the Middle East, so that was one. Kind of gave me a reason for being there. But then I helped start a couple of churches in Jordan as well as in Iraq. And then after about 5 or 6 years, I was noticing that a lot of the guys were reliant on me because I had the doctorate and I'm from America, and I thought, this is not going to help those churches grow, right? Is if they rely on me. And so we didn't want to leave the region, meaning my wife and I, and at that point we had 3 children. But by the way, so I pastored, I planted a church, and I pastored another church before I went over as a missionary. So I went as a missionary when I was 38. So we're like, we don't want to leave the region, but we don't want to get in the way of what God's doing. So we went to Cairo, to Egypt, and that way I could visit Iraq, I could visit Jordan, and visit and encourage the churches, but they weren't dependent on me in the same way. So I was in the region from, I remember it very well because I went shortly after 9/11. I don't know if people listening to the podcast will remember 9/11, but that was in 2001, September 11th. So I went just a few months after that, and then I came home from the Middle East. I mean, of course, I came home times as a missionary, but moved back during the Arab Spring in 2011, when there was a revolution in Egypt, and I was there during that revolution and thought we would just kind of weather it, but I was responsible for a handful of short-term missionaries who didn't know the language or the culture, so I had to get them out. And when I got them out, I got my family out at the same time, because just civil society collapsed at that point, and different factions were running the country, and so I got out. Now I still go back to the Middle East on a regular basis, but I haven't lived there since 2011.
What is it like engaging that culture with the gospel? I'm sure it's much different than here.
So in some ways, you might I might even say it's easier, because it's a religious culture, and so it's 99% Muslim in most of those countries. You know, maybe in Egypt, say it's 95%. In Jordan, it's 99%. But they're religious. They're just not followers of Jesus, but they're religious, and so you can. It's not like they don't think you're crazy if you take your religion seriously. As a matter of fact, when you take your religion seriously, they respect that. So when I've had Muslim shopkeepers, or like at a restaurant, when they see me pray with my family, they're very impressed by that, because I don't think they think Christians pray, because they pray 5 times a day in a very formalized way, and I think Christians don't pray. And so, like, when they see me pray with my family, that grabs their attention. So you have to be careful. You can certainly model it, in terms of integrity, and model it in terms of what you do with your family, and how you lead your family, and that kind of thing. And that's very I think winsome witness. But then the other thing is you can answer their questions. You can talk positively about Jesus. What you have to be careful about in that region is you have to be careful about being negative about Islam, or negative about their prophet. And I like to say, you can let a Muslim say negative things about their prophet, but you don't. It's like talking about someone's mother. Even if I, want to say something bad about my mother, I don't want you saying something bad about my mother, And so that's kind of the way it is there. And I mean, I have very, very close friends that have been arrested there, and in pretty much every country I've been in, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, who've paid a price for their faith. Now, sometimes their arrest was for their own good. Like I knew of a Muslim guy who became a follower of Jesus in Jordan, and they arrested him, and they said it was to protect him from the radicals, because they're like, if the word gets out that you're now a Jesus follower, the radicals are going to kill you, so we're going to protect you by arresting you. Now a couple years later, we were able to get him a humanitarian visa to Australia, but that's kind of like the only way he was getting out, is if we could get him a humanitarian visa. So anyway, I'm not sure why I was going down that path, other than to say that in some ways, being in that context, because religion is, it's not a secular environment, so you don't really have people saying there's not a God. It's just, it's a matter of they think we've got a misconception about God, that we're wrong, that we're heretics, and so. But in some ways, it's easier to talk, because they expect to talk about religious things.
And don't a lot of Muslims have knowledge of Jesus?
Oh, yeah.
And certain parts of the Old Testament and things like that?
Yeah, so for typical Muslim, they would say there's 3 holy books. There's the Old Testament, that and they think of that, basically, well, more than 3. They would say the law that came from Moses. Then they would say there's the Psalms that came through David. Then there's the gospel that came by Jesus. They don't really think of the gospel the way we talk about gospel. They think the gospel is just one book, like the law was a book. And then they would say, and then Muhammad came, and he's he's the one for us Arabs. So Moses and David were for the Jews, and Jesus was for Christians, and now Muhammad is for us Arabs, and then beyond that. So, but they would say that those are holy books, but that they've been corrupted, and the only one that's legitimate now, truly uncorrupted, is the Quran. So you have to, I mean, there's certainly good explanations if someone will listen to you. For example, if we have copies of Jesus's teachings from well before the time of Muhammad, and so if they were corrupted, Muhammad should have known that when he said the things he said, or what God said through him, the way they describe it. So there's good explanations if you can have a conversation with people. But my bigger experience is recognizing where God's already been at work. So this is the most clear-cut example of how this can work. I didn't know really how to speak other than like hello, any Arabic, my first few months, there. I traveled down, I was near the Saudi border, and I met a guy, an Arab guy, who worked with like a tourist business. He had drove a Jeep or something, and he saw me, and maybe he wanted to get some business. And I was down there on vacation with my family, I think it was, or I was down there for a long weekend, down by the Saudi border. And this guy can speak some English, and so he speaks to me in English, and I'm thrilled. I'm thinking, well, good, I can talk to this guy in English. Maybe I can learn a little bit of Arabic. And he says, come into my shop. And so we come in, we sit down like this, and he's like, what's your name? I tell him my name. And he's like, where are you from? I tell him where I'm from. He's pouring me coffee. He's just glad to have a visitor. And his name is Abdullah, which means the servant of Allah. And then the third question he asked me is, what do you do for a living? And so I can't say I'm a missionary, right? I say I'm a Christian pastor, because that's what I am. And he would know, there's not many, but he would know that there are some churches in Jordan, and that there are some ethnic Christians, and that they have pastors. So I tell him I'm a Christian pastor. And I remember he's pouring me his coffee, and he just stops. And I've known him for 2 minutes, right? He saw me out on the sidewalk. He said, come in, have some coffee with me. And he's pouring me coffee. And he's asked me now this third question. I say, I'm a Christian pastor. And he stops and he says, if I don't believe in Jesus, will I go to hell?
Wow.
I'm like, what? and there's one other guy in the room with us. His cousin, his name is Muhammad. So Abdullah and Muhammad. And Muhammad is older. Abdullah's a younger guy. And Abdullah, and so I'm thinking, he just wants to argue, right? So I say back to him, I say, well, if I don't believe in Muhammad, am I going to hell? I just think he just wants to argue religion. He said, that's not what I asked you. If I don't believe in Jesus, will I go to hell? And I'm thinking, what in the world? What am I going to do with this? I mean, I'm just, my mind's freaking out. I don't know what to say. I've never met this guy. This is shortly after 9/11, right? So I'm thinking this guy could be ready to, So this is what I said to him. I said, well, Jesus says in his book, that's the way I phrased it. Jesus says in his book, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. So I just figure I let him interpret it the way he wants to interpret it, right? I'm not saying you're going to hell. I'm just saying Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You can't go to God except through me. I just say that. And I'm waiting. I don't know what's going to happen. And then he says, can you give me a copy of Jesus' book? And I mean, of all the things, I was not expecting that. So he doesn't want to talk to me anymore in front of Muhammad. But later, I get him a copy, of the New Testament in Arabic. I get him the Jesus film. He invites me out to his Bedouin village, and I share the gospel with him. Now, I don't know what he finally decided, because after I had explained the gospel to him and went out to his village, I remember him. He was 25. He says to me, he says, "Nobody will let me marry their daughter if I do this."
Mm.
And he says, "Do I have to tell anybody? Do I have to tell people if I do this?" And I said, "You don't have to go announce it, but I don't want you to think you can keep this a secret. That's not fair to you, because it will become clear at some point. So I want you to understand that." So I don't know what he decided, because we didn't have cell phones the same way we have them now, and I don't know so I don't know what he decided. But here's the thing that I always think about is, what prompted him to ask that question? I'm thinking like God must have shown up in a vision, or he had heard, but somehow God had prepared him. And as soon as he met someone who he thought could answer that question, he just left all politeness and just like, "If I don't believe in Jesus, will I go to hell?" And so it just always then, that happened in my first couple of months in the Middle East. I always thought, ever since then, who knows how God has prepared these people?
Wow.
Anybody I'm with, God maybe has prepared them, and maybe they're just... So all of that to say, I never thought of as like, I got to somehow convince this Muslim. I'm looking to see where Jesus has already been at work, and I'm just kind of feeding into that,
Wow. Man, that's such an amazing story.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Well, it transformed my life, and yeah.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes when I think about ministering to people, it can be, when you try to do it in your own strength, or like think about how you're going to do it in your own strength, it can seem very daunting. But
yeah,
that seems like a really good example of the Holy Spirit just like preparing this for you. And yeah, like this guy and people we interact with in America, who knows what God's doing in their life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and when I started thinking about that story, I thought, well, that's exactly what happened in Acts 9 with Ananias and Saul, who becomes Paul. Is God gets Saul's attention by this Damascus Road experience. Then he's blind, and he sends him into Damascus, and then he goes and tells Ananias, basically, "Ananias, I prepared this guy. I want you to go talk to him." Ananias didn't want to go talk to him because he knew the guy's reputation, but God was like, "No, go. I've prepared him." And so that's what I felt like God had done for me, is like, I was afraid of Muslims. I had just heard 9/11 and all that kind of stuff, and God was showing me is like, Blake, you got to step out of your comfort zone. I'm preparing people, and I think we do need that here. It's not just there, right? It's here. Is that we don't know what God has done, what dream someone's had, what question they've been asking, what Bible verse that they remember from their childhood that God's been bringing back to them. It just is kind of like, okay, how am I going to join with what God's already doing here, and having the courage to step into it when he reveals that he is doing something. So
yeah, I think it takes obedience and courage.
Yeah,
that's really good. 2 more questions for you, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. I want to hear you expand on your passion for a house of prayer for all nations. Like that's that's all throughout the church, and that's something you're passionate about, and I just want to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, so Jesus, Jesus is quoting from Isaiah, and he goes into Jerusalem, and the temple is. It's told in multiple gospel accounts, but in one of the accounts, it's very clear that what Jesus is upset about. This is when Jesus, throws out the money changers and stuff. Is that the way the temple was designed is, it's like God's presence was in the Holy of Holies, and then there was a place that the priests could come, and then there was a place that the Jewish men could come, and then a place for the Jewish women, and then on the outskirts, it's what was called the court of the nations, or the court for the non-Jews, the Gentiles. And apparently that's where they began to set up their shop to do business. Now, they were supposed to set it up off the temple compound grounds, but they're like, well, we get better access to the clients if we set up here. But in doing that, they were blocking where the one place the Gentiles, the non-Jews, could actually come and kind of be exposed to God in the court of the Gentiles. And so Jesus gets very upset and he throws this stuff away. It's not just because they were taking advantage financially, it's because they were actually physically taking up the space and making kind of a mockery. It's supposed to be a place of worship, and they were making it a place that was to their advantage versus the advantage of the outsider. And he says, my house, meaning, the temple, is to be a house of prayer for all nations. And so, one of the key things is that God loves the Jewish people. He loves biblical Israel. He loves them, but he didn't love them to the exclusion of others. He loved them to use them as like a missionary force to reach the world. I mean, that's what he says to Abraham, the founder, of the Jewish race, I'm going to bless you and make you a blessing. I'm going to bless you, and all the nations or all the families of the earth are going to be blessed through you. So God's people are always to be blessed, but not to somehow hold on to that blessing. They're to give it away. And so when I think of this idea of being a house of prayer for all nations, is partly thinking about, we exist to serve. I exist to serve. We as a community of faith exist to serve the outsider, to make a place where they can come. Now, of course, we receive blessings from God. We need to grow. We need to have places where we're learning, but, we can't do it. One of my dreams, here's just an example of this. One of my dreams, we're not there yet, but we're a lot further there than I ever imagined, is, there's a church I saw only one time. It was called Church 51. I'm like, what kind of name is that? And I found out that they were called that because either they were or their goal was to give away 51% of all the money they took in.
Wow.
And so that's been one of my dreams. And so I'll just tell you, like, here we now I think are up pushing maybe 38% that we're giving away outside of us. That's huge, right? I mean, that's significant. And so, but that's the mentality, right? Is the house of prayer for all nations. So there's two parts to it. The one is to be a house of prayer. Is I've just learned that, I think the expression is, when man works, man works. When man prays, God works. And I've just learned that I've done a whole lot of ministry in my lifetime with good intention, but I did it in my own wisdom. I did it in my own strength. And I'm like, I don't have the same time that I had, when I was 20, thinking I got, 40 more years of ministry. I realize I have, hopefully a decade, 2 decades, but I want to make every moment count. And so I want to make sure I'm hearing from God and I'm doing it in the power of God. And if I'm not, if I'm not hearing from God, I want to join God in what he's doing. And so prayer is essential. And then anything that's going to happen that's going to be significant is going to be because God's acting, and then I'm kind of picking up the pieces of what God is doing. So I'm just very committed to the centrality of prayer. Nothing good happens without it. I'm not going to understand what God's up to, and breakthroughs are not going to come. And then the second part is for all nations, is that God's heart is for the outsider. Yes, it's for his people, but it's also for the outsider, especially the nations. And, we didn't even get into this part of the story. So I got to tell you this because this is such an important part of my story.
Bring it up.
So my wife and I couldn't have children. We now have 5 children, and we now have 5 grandchildren, but we couldn't have children. So we have 2 daughters by adoption, and we have 3 boys biologically from us. 6 years into our marriage, we still, weren't able to have children. We adopt our first child, and we we go overseas to adopt. We go to Moscow, Russia to adopt, and we adopt this little girl, and she's 4.5 months old. And we adopt her. We're in the orphanage, and we see her every day for 10 days, bonding with her. And finally, they say, "Okay, we see you're bonding. We'll sign the papers." This is 1992, not too far after the fall of the Soviet Union. And they sign the paper. They say, "Okay, you can adopt her. And by the way, your daughter is not Russian." We're like, "We're in Moscow. What do you mean our daughter's not Russian?" They said, "Your daughter is Azerbaijani." I'd never heard of Azerbaijan in 1992. So Azerbaijan is a part of the former Soviet Union that's just north of Iran. And so the Azerbaijani people are like half in the former Soviet Union and half in the north of Iran. And they're a Muslim people. So I didn't know that. We adopt this little girl. I fall in love with her, as rightfully I should, but I'm also intrigued about her people, right? The Azerbaijani people. And what I find out in 1992, there's 14 million Azerbaijanis between Iran and the country now of Azerbaijan, former Soviet Republic. 14 million. There are only 50 known followers of Jesus out of 14 million. So God radically changes my heart. I mean, I'd already been to graduate school, seminary, all that, and I kind of knew in my head, God loves the world. But here I am now. I have this little girl who the chances are she might grow up her entire life and never hear the gospel. Mm. And so God began to, gave me a sense. There's this language that some people familiar with the church would hear called social justice, right? Is we want the poor to receive justice. And we do, right? We want there to be justice for the people on the margins. But then I also say there's a gospel justice, right? Don't Azerbaijanis deserve to hear the gospel as much as people from West Virginia? Yeah. And so all of a sudden God began to just say, why are these people still not hearing the gospel? I'm going to be going to that part of the world soon, and there's a people group I'm going to be going to see in the Middle East part of the world, and 87% of them have never heard the gospel, and like less than half of 1% are followers of Jesus, but 87% have never heard the gospel. And so there's a sense of gospel justice, right? It's like, how can that be? They deserve to hear the gospel. And I always think back to my daughter, who now has 3 of her own kids. She loves Jesus. She's teaching them about Jesus. And I think if God hadn't supernaturally plucked her out of that, put her into my family, she might have lived and died and, her whole life and never knew the story of Jesus. So, so that's part of my story too. I don't know how I missed that part, wow. But that's a significant part of how I ended up going in the first place to the Middle East, was because I had this heart to go, man, there's a sense of gospel justice. I was pastoring a thriving church in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I remember looking around one day, and I could see from my church, I could see 5 other churches. Wow. And here I have this girl that I'm raising up who there's 50 known believers out of the entire population, 14 million, which would have been about the population of Florida. So there had been 50 believers out of the entire population, and God just wrecked me. He's like, how... Not everyone knows this, Blake, but you do, because you have this little girl in your house. You have eyes to see, what other people maybe can't see. So you may, maybe someone might be asking, so why are you pastoring a church where you're at right now? Well, first of all, I went over and I served, and I did what I did, and I realized I can now serve in maybe even a more effective way from a distance. I can empower them, right? I don't want to get in their way. I started kind of a movement, and it's going on. But also, God has brought the nations right here. When I found out that Harrisonburg has, when I came here, there's 60 languages spoken in our high school. 60 languages. And we're out in the rural part of Virginia. And I thought, God's bringing the nations right here. And so you've seen it in our church. I mean, we have people from the nations here, and we're
Yeah.
intentional about that. And so I just realized you can be intentional about the nations because God's moving them around. Acts 17, Paul talks about how God defines the times and the places of nations so that people will come to know the faith. So I think when people talk about the immigration issue, I'm like, you can have your politics, but the immigrants that are here, we're going to share Jesus with them. If you want to argue this way, you want to argue that way, that's not my concern. My concern is the immigrants that are here, however they're here, I'm going to take advantage of them being here and going to share Jesus with them.
Wow.
All right, you got me all fired up now.
Yeah, man. I love it. That's so good. It's amazing how God used this girl that you adopted to stir you into all that. Yeah.
And my infertility, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, went back to my physical psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, why I couldn't go into the military. God stopped me from going that path. Then he's like, all right, Blake, you're not getting it. I want you to actually be. And so he's like, okay. And so I look at these things as gifts, right? And I didn't look at it as a gift as we're struggling with it, but yeah. So
wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that, man.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Last question. How would you, or what is the gospel, and how can people respond to it?
So, the gospel is literally the good news that God loves each of us so much that he paid the price for our own rebellion, even if we don't think of it as rebellion, even in our selfishness or whatever, we chose to go our own way from God, and he's our creator. He has the right to our kind of allegiance, our obedience, but we chose to do it our own way. Some of us by ignorance, some of us by intentionality, but I've never met anyone who thought, oh no, I never rebelled against God. We all have this deep internal understanding that we've chosen to do it our own way. And the gospel is this good news that God doesn't say, Blake, you have to make up for that. You have to somehow outdo all those bad things and do more good things. But that God himself, because we believe in this triunity of God, this Trinity, God himself in the form of God the Son, took on human flesh and lived a human life, but he lived it perfectly. No other human has ever done that. We all have sin we need to atone for, we need to make up for. He didn't. So because of that, he was able to pay for my sin and your sin because he didn't have to pay for his own sin. And so he paid by receiving, the judgment of my sin. He paid for it by dying on the cross, and he paid for that, and that he makes this exchange offer. I like to think of it this way: that I'm wearing filthy rags, and he's wearing this beautiful suit, and he's like, I'll take your filthy rags and I'll give you my suit. He'll take my sin. He'll give me his righteousness. And so Jesus took my sin. He paid for it by dying, and he offered me his righteousness. Now, that's what I need to do. Is I need to, first of all, not try to think I'm gonna make up for all those bad things I do. I just have to receive it as a gift, and it's humbling, right? It's humbling because I can't make up for it. I just have to receive this gift. I have to have the perfect Son of God take my shameful stuff, and I'm the one who put him on the cross to die this humiliating death. So I need to humbly release that, say, yes, it is my sin. Forgive me for that. And then I need to receive his righteousness, and then live in that new identity, not live with a mindset that I'm just a worm, but now live with this and begin to grow in this identity that I am loved by God, and that God has purposes for me, and that he puts his spirit within me to help me to live in a way that can honor him. And so, yeah, that's at least maybe in a broad brushstroke, that's the good news.
Well said.
Okay.
That was excellent. It's like you're a professional or something.
Yeah, maybe I've done it once or twice. So, but I don't think I've ever been asked just that straightforward question. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to say it.
Yeah, no problem. I just want to thank you for coming on or letting me come here and just sharing all that. I need to go back and listen to it and unpack some more of it. To close out, would you pray for the listeners and all of us? Just maybe invite people to that what you just spoke to if they've never.
You will never know. You'll never like go, do I have it all figured out? It's like, I like to say, just respond to as much as you know, right? I mean, it's like, as much as God's revealing to you, respond to that. And if you're like, okay, I think I have a little bit of an idea, God can work with that, right? And so just wherever, if someone is listening to this and hearing this and it resonates with them, is just say, Jesus, I'm giving you my ugliness, my junk, my pain, my brokenness, and if you're willing to give me your goodness, your holiness, I'm going to receive that. So, Lord Jesus, I pray. Well, first of all, on behalf of Mitchell and myself, we just say thank you that you revealed your love to us in our own stories, putting people in our lives, creating circumstances that caused us to maybe kind of realize the error of our ways, or the foolishness of our ways, or the ineffectiveness of our ways. You kind of have put some dead ends there, not to harm us, but to redirect us. And so, Lord, I just want to say thank you. I want to thank you that Mitchell and I have both experienced your salvation and experienced this hope of eternal life that we're beginning to taste even now. And Lord, I pray for anybody who's listening and this is kind of ringing a bell for them. Lord, I pray that they would just say, just release themselves to you and say, Jesus, here, take me. Take me in my brokenness, take me in my ugliness, take me in my sin. And if you would have me, Jesus, I give my life to you. And would you cleanse me? And would you put your spirit in me so that I can live a life that's pleasing to you? And Lord, I pray for anybody who was maybe had done that, and maybe they've wandered away from you, and they're thinking, you know what, I never got to that point where I was all in. And so, Lord, I just want to pray for people who want to say, today's the day to be all in. Lord, I pray that they would not let Satan lie to them and tell them that they've fouled up too much, they've gotten too far off track. Lord, I just think of the story of the prodigal son who wants to come back and say, I'll make it all right, I'll work for you. And the father has said, no, I just want you to come home. And so, Lord, I just pray for those who've maybe been a prodigal and have slipped away, Lord, that they would realize that you are waiting to embrace them and put that robe, that righteousness of Jesus on them afresh, and to say, I love you, you're my son, my daughter. So, Lord, minister to people through the word of our testimony. We just offer it because it's about you, and you're the one who's done it. And so, Jesus, do your work in our lives and in the lives of those that are listening. Amen.
Amen.